407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any other nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war, the Battle of Gettysburg, the turning point of the American Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg, occurring in July of 1863, was a psychological, economical, and military turning point of the Civil War. The outcome of this chance meeting between opposing forces at Gettysburg shifted the momentum from the Confederacy to the Union. Due to heavy losses from new weapon technology by the North, the South was unable to launch another attack north of the Mason-Dixon line for the remainder of the war. This defeat caused the South to lose hope that England would recognize them as an independent country and back them financially, which eventually led to its defeat 2 years later. Matt Atkinson, Civil War expert at Gettysburg College and National Park Service guide, explains why Gettysburg is the turning point of the Civil War.
It's generally become known as the high water mark of the Confederacy. The high water mark meaning that it was the peak of Confederate fortunes during the Civil War. Gettysburg is Robert E. Lee's best attempt, or greatest chance might be a better way to put it, to win the Civil War. Robert E. Lee marches his army into the North, and what he wants to do, his stated objective, is to win a victory on Northern soil. If he can defeat the Union Army here in Pennsylvania, he could very well force Abraham Lincoln and the United States government to sue for peace. Robert E. Lee would never, ever have another opportunity like he did here in 1863. So, from Gettysburg, we like to say that the Confederate fortune started to wane from its peak from Gettysburg.
As the battle raged on through July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, these 3 days meant a lifetime as the fields at Gettysburg ran red with blood. Licensed battlefield guide Jim Miller said,
"There's 163,000 men fight here, 51 to 58,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing."
That's close to the number of American lives lost during the 9 years of the Vietnam conflict. But why was this battle so costly in human life? To answer this question, we need to understand the battle. The date is July 1st, 1863. The Civil War has been raging on for over 2 years. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia had won many decisive battles, and General Lee made the strategic decision to invade the North, hoping to capture either Washington, D.C. or Baltimore and crush the Army of the Potomac on their own ground. Like spokes on a wheel, 10 to 12 roads converged in the little southern Pennsylvania town of Gettysburg, which brought about this chance meeting of these two opposing forces. At this time, the Confederate forces thought Gettysburg was unprotected except for a small local militia.
They were traveling on the roads with the sole intent of finding each other to give each other battle, and all the roads meet at Gettysburg.
Confederate General Henry Heath was granted permission by General Lee to venture into Gettysburg to commandeer a known supply of shoes, which his troops desperately needed. General Lee gave him strict orders to avoid a general engagement until the full Army of Northern Virginia had concentrated in the area. Union General John Buford and his cavalry saw the cloud of dust coming up the Chambersburg Pike towards their position, produced by the 7,600 pairs of feet of General Heath's division. General Buford, recognizing the lay of the land, knew how crucial the high ground just south of Gettysburg would be in the upcoming conflict. He realized that if the Confederate Army reached the high ground, the Army of the Potomac would have a hard time dislodging them. Buford decided to utilize 3 main ridges west of Gettysburg: Her Ridge, McPherson Ridge, and Seminary Ridge. In this defensive position, Buford's 2,748 troops would soon be confronted by 7,600 Confederate infantrymen. In an attempt to slow General Heath's advance into town, Buford ordered to open fire on the Confederate troops. This skirmish continued on until 10:20 a.m., when the Confederates had reached Her Ridge and pushed back the Union. Had not Buford recognized the importance of preventing the Confederate troops from gaining the high ground, historians contend that this action would have been a turning point for a Southern victory in only one day. Later that day, Confederate General Richard Ewell began his assault from the north, attacking across the open fields. Most of the Union line held under extremely heavy attacks. General Ewell was given orders to take the heights of Cemetery Hill and pursue the retreating Union forces if practicable, but he chose not to attack. Historians have debated whether that missed opportunity could have also been a turning point in the battle.
Some say if Stonewall Jackson was here, he would have taken Cemetery Hill. On July 1st, if the Confederates would have continued their attack and knocked the Yankee fugitives off of that hill, they wouldn't have won the Battle of Gettysburg.
Despite the loss of ground and men, the Confederacy still came out victorious from winning 2 out of 3 engagements of the day. The second day, July 2nd, 1863. General Robert E. Lee attempted to build on his first day's success. His Army of Northern Virginia engaged the enemy with multiple attacks on their flanks, which was now under the leadership of General George G. Meade. By the morning of July 2nd, 6 of the 7 corps of the Army of the Potomac had arrived on the battlefield. The Union Army assumed defensive positions in a fishhook shape about 3 miles long, from Culp's Hill around to Cemetery Hill and down the spine of Cemetery Ridge. The Army of Northern Virginia had a line that was almost parallel to the Union's line, and the Army of the Potomac was well prepared for Lee's offensive. They had spent most of the night building breastworks out of trees, rocks, and dirt. The line of the Union Army, running north to south along the high ground, provided them with an excellent defensive position with compact interior lines. But soon a chink in the armor was created when Union Major General Dan Sickles was dissatisfied with his assigned position. In the early afternoon, without orders, he advanced his line nearly a half a mile west in order to take advantage of open high ground around a nearby peach orchard. This move exposed Sickles on both sides and created a gap in the Union line behind him. Soon after Sickles and his men arrived at their new position, Confederate General James Longstreet attacked. Union General Meade recognized the breach in his defense and quickly sent troops in to reinforce Sickles' line, but after furious fighting, Confederate General Longstreet broke through, causing the Union line to collapse completely in an area known as the Wheat Field. Consequently, this resulted in some of the heaviest fighting and casualties of the entire Civil War. The Union left flank, protected by the 20th Maine and commanded by Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, had been given the orders to hold the ground at all hazards. After 2 hours of fighting, having exhausted their ammunition and being outnumbered, Colonel Chamberlain ordered his men to fix bayonets and charge the line. Ultimately, the second day at Gettysburg had cost each army 9,000 plus casualties. Lee's Confederate forces had again gained ground, but had failed to dislodge the Union Army from its strong defensive position. The third day, July 3, 1863. General Lee, having won decisive battles on day 1 and fought to a draw on day 2, felt the time was ripe to end the Civil War at this site. Said General Lee in his report, "The conduct of the troops was all that I could desire or expect, and they deserve success so far as it can be deserved by heroic valor and fortitude." Believing his men were invincible, General Lee initiated the assault on the center of the Union Army's line, known as Pickett's Charge. As General Longstreet said to General Lee prior to the charge, "I believe this attack will fail. No 15,000 men ever created could take that hill." 6,500 men lost their lives in this ill-fated battle. Had this maneuver been successful, the Battle of Gettysburg would have been a military turning point for the Confederates and not the Union. Many historians argue that the Battle of Antietam was the turning point of the Civil War.
The Battle of Antietam is absolutely pivotal in terms of thrusting the Confederates away from northern soil, from facilitating the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation, and bringing the war back to Virginia.
Still others argue that it was Vicksburg. While those battles were pivotal, these 3 days in July of 1863 at Gettysburg was the ultimate turning point of the Civil War. The Confederates' defeat placed doubt in the minds of the Southern soldiers and leaders, while at the same time bolstering the hopes of the Union troops and their supporters. Additionally, European countries withdrew their financial support and failed to recognize the Confederate States of America as an independent country. In conclusion, President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address states, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here."